The river was calm that morning. A silver SUV sat quietly on the edge of the Mississippi, keys still in the ignition, the driver's seat empty. Inside, a phone, a wallet, and a single handwritten note. It read, "I've been living a double life. Yes, it involves Frank. I knew I would end up dead." That note would be the beginning of a mystery, and the end of a woman's life built on trust, love, and one devastating lie. A scam so powerful it didn't just steal her money. It took everything. If you're new here, comment below where you're watching from, and subscribe to BYTE Crimes. Your support helps us keep uncovering chilling, educational true crime stories just like this one. Now sit back, and let's begin the story in full. Galena, Illinois. A small but picturesque town sitting quietly along the Mississippi River, where people still wave when you pass on the street and where life moves at the pace of the seasons. That's where Laura Kowal called home. 57 years old, a mother and a widow still trying to find her footing after losing her husband of 24 years. By all accounts, Laura was warm, intelligent, respected, a hospital executive who had worked her whole life, raised a daughter she adored, and built a reputation for kindness. But grief does strange things. It leaves a silence that sometimes feels impossible to fill. And that silence is exactly what the internet listens for. Like so many others trying to start again, Laura joined an online dating site. She wasn't looking for a whirlwind romance, just companionship. Someone to talk to over coffee. Someone who might understand the quiet ache of missing a partner. That's when she met him. He called himself Frank Borg, a Swedish investment advisor, widowed, polite, charming. He said he had a daughter who reminded him of Laura's, a coincidence that made her smile. At first, it was innocent, emails that turned into long nightly messages, messages that turned into hours of phone calls. They talked about their favorite books, travel, and the future. He said things like, "My heart is ready for you." And she wrote back, "Love you, Frank. You're in my heart forever." For Laura, it wasn't just affection. It was healing. For Frank, it was strategy. Scammers don't rush. They study you, your habits, your vulnerabilities, your dreams. They build what investigators call emotional architecture, a careful scaffolding of trust strong enough to carry the weight of a lie. For months, Frank never asked for money. He told stories of business trips, investment meetings, and the stress of running a company. He planted seeds of credibility, talking about clients, markets, and returns. Then, slowly, he introduced an idea. He was expanding his investment firm, a company called Goose Investments, and he wanted her help. He said he trusted her. He wanted her to feel part of his success, their shared future. And in those words, trust, success, future, Laura heard something she hadn't heard in years. Purpose. She didn't see a scam. She saw a man offering her a partnership, in business and in life. So when Frank said he needed her to open an account for convenience, she agreed. When he asked her to transfer money just temporarily, she did. When he said it would all come back double, she believed him. It started small, a few thousand here, 10,000 there. But soon the numbers grew. Her retirement fund, her savings, even a mortgage on her house. Over time, she would send nearly $1.5 million. Scammers understand psychology better than most therapists. Once money is involved, they isolate the victim, emotionally and socially. Frank told Laura not to tell anyone. He said business deals were private. He said people wouldn't understand their relationship. He framed secrecy as intimacy, and Laura, being loyal, complied. Her daughter, Kelly, began to notice changes. Her mother was quieter, distracted. She always seemed busy, guarded. When Kelly asked if everything was okay, Laura would smile and say, "Just busy with some work." But behind that smile, a storm was building. What makes this case haunting isn't just the scam, it's the duality of Laura's existence. To her friends, she was the same kind, generous woman. To Frank, she was an investor, a confidant, a lifeline. And in her mind, she was caught somewhere between both worlds, trying to reconcile love with logic, trust with doubt. Emails between her and Frank later showed just how deeply she believed in him. They weren't the robotic messages of a con. They were tender, intimate, full of plans for the future. But as months passed, cracks began to form. There were excuses, cancellations, delays. Every time she asked to meet, something came up: a delayed flight, a family emergency, an international deal gone wrong. Frank's world always had just enough detail to seem real, and just enough mystery to keep her hooked. Then came the moment that every scam eventually reaches: doubt. Laura began to sense something was off. The money wasn't returning, emails were slower, phone calls are shorter. She tried to look up Goose Investments, the company she'd been sending money to. Nothing. When she called her bank, subtle questions led to uncomfortable silences. Her gut told her something was wrong, but her heart couldn't accept it. Because to admit she'd been scammed meant admitting the love she thought was real never existed. Victims of romance scams often describe it as a kind of grief worse than death, because the person who betrayed them never even existed to begin with. At this point in the story, what do you think? Could you imagine discovering that someone you loved, someone you trusted, was nothing more than a digital ghost? Comment your thoughts below. By mid-2020, Laura's behavior became erratic. She stopped attending social events. Her friends described her as anxious, preoccupied. Her daughter noticed she was losing weight, sleeping less. Then, in August 2020, everything came to a head. Laura suddenly vanished. She left her home without explanation. Her car was later found parked at a boat ramp, about 50 miles away, keys in the ignition. Inside were her purse, her wallet, her phone, and that note. "I've been living a double life. Yes, it involves Frank. I knew I would end up dead." No one knows exactly what happened next. Authorities later found her body in the Mississippi River. The coroner ruled it drowning, but could not determine how or why. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence of foul play, just questions and grief. When her daughter Kelly learned of her mother's note, she was heartbroken, but she was also determined. She began combing through Laura's emails and financial records. That's when the horrifying truth emerged. Wire transfers, multiple bank accounts, digital footprints leading to Goose Investments, and hundreds of messages from Frank. But Frank Borg didn't exist. His profile photo had been stolen from a real Swedish businessman who had no idea his image was being used. The company? Fake. The phone number? Disconnected. The love story? Nothing but lines of text on a screen. Investigators traced the emails to IP addresses linked to West Africa, a region known for sophisticated romance scam operations. But the money was long gone, moved through shell accounts and cryptocurrency. The case officially became one of thousands, yet emotionally it stood apart. Because behind every data point, there's a heartbeat. And this one had stopped. For Kelly, grief became a mixture of sorrow, guilt, and disbelief. She told CBS News, "My mom felt the emotions of being loved because that's what they exploited." That's the cruelty of these scams. They prey on human need, on loneliness, on the desire to be seen, understood, wanted. Laura wasn't naive. She was human. And the people who did this to her, they didn't just steal her money, they stole her hope. Federal investigators later confirmed that Laura's story was not isolated. In 2023 alone, more than 64,000 Americans reported being victims of romance scams, with over $1.1 billion in losses. Experts believe the real number is far higher because most victims never report it. Why? Because of shame. Because they fear being judged for falling for it. But the truth is, anyone can be targeted. Scammers don't hunt the foolish, they hunt the feeling, the lonely, the grieving, the hopeful. Weeks after Laura's death, Kelly discovered something strange. A document her mother had drafted, a list of transactions, coded notes about bank accounts, and references to names she didn't recognize. It looked like she had started investigating herself. Had Laura realized the truth before she died? Was she planning to expose the scam, or was she running from the shame of it? And most hauntingly, was her death truly an accident? Because among her emails was one final message, never sent, addressed to Frank. It read, "I know what you did. The truth will come out." The unsent email on Laura's computer became the spark that reignited the investigation. Those words, "I know what you did. The truth will come out," suggested she might have finally uncovered the lie. Detectives began tracing her digital trail from the bank transactions to the IP addresses behind each email. It didn't take long before the illusion unraveled. Frank Borg, the man she believed was her partner, was a phantom, a name stitched together from fragments of the internet. His profile photo belonged to a real Swedish financial advisor who was stunned when CBS News reached him. He'd never met Laura. He'd never even heard of Goose Investments. The deeper investigators dug, the more grotesque the web became. Her money had been wired through accounts in New York, then Nigeria, then Ghana. Each layer peeled away revealed another shell company, fake addresses, fake signatures, fake people. Laura hadn't been speaking to one man. She'd been communicating with an entire network of scammers, each trained to mimic affection, humor, and vulnerability. To them, love was logistics. Romance scams like this are often run from digital call centers, rows of laptops in cramped apartments across the globe. Operators follow scripts written to extract trust, affection, and eventually cash. They keep databases of victims, age, profession, emotional triggers. Every response is logged, tested, refined. One former scammer told CBS, "We were trained to read people's pain, to say what they needed to hear, to sound like hope." For Laura, that meant gentle words, promises of travel, talk of shared grief. For another victim, it might be an adventure, or stability, or rescue. They tailor the illusion like a suit, fitted perfectly to the insecurities of the wearer. Investigators eventually traced several of Laura's transfers to a single Nigerian account. But here's the painful part. By the time they found it, the funds were gone. Converted into cryptocurrency, moved through multiple exchanges, and withdrawn anonymously. The FBI classified it as part of a transnational romance fraud network, one of hundreds currently operating worldwide. Each cell handles hundreds of victims simultaneously, like emotional assembly lines. Despite the complexity, Laura's daughter Kelly refused to give up. She kept pushing for recognition, telling journalists and lawmakers, "This isn't just about my mom. It's about all the people too ashamed to speak." Her persistence turned one woman's tragedy into national attention. CBS News launched its own deep dive, Anything for Love, inside the romance scam epidemic. The report exposed not just Laura's story, but the sheer scale of the crisis. In 2023 alone, over 64,000 Americans reported being victims of romance scams, $1.1 billion in known losses. And experts estimated the true total might be double. But numbers don't bleed, stories do. And Laura's was the story that broke through, because it had everything: love, deception, and the haunting silence of a river that keeps its secrets. Why do these crimes work so well? Experts say it's because they don't target the mind first, they target the heart. Humans are wired for connection. We want to believe the person on the other side of the screen means what they say. Once emotional trust is built, cognitive reasoning takes a backseat. Love literally changes brain chemistry, releasing dopamine and oxytocin, the same chemicals that fuel addiction. Victims enter what psychologists call the fantasy loop. They justify inconsistencies, excuse red flags, and ignore logic because the emotional reward is too strong to let go. And when that illusion collapses, the psychological crash can be catastrophic: guilt, shame, anxiety, even suicidal thoughts. Laura's story shows how powerful that crash can be. For Kelly Gao, her mother's death was more than loss. It was a question that refused to die. She spent months retracing her mother's steps, talking to federal agents, journalists, and cybercrime experts. In one interview, she said, "My mom thought she was helping someone she loved. She didn't realize she was feeding a machine." Kelly learned her mother had been asked to create new accounts, not for herself, but for others. Unwittingly, Laura had become what investigators call a money mule. She wasn't just a victim, she was being used to launder other victims' funds. It's a cruel circle, one broken heart fueling the next. When CBS aired Laura's story, thousands of viewers wrote in. Some said they'd lost money too. Others said they were currently in online relationships that suddenly felt suspicious. One woman from Texas wrote, "After seeing Laura's story, I checked the man I've been talking to. His photos were stolen too." In that moment, awareness saved her from becoming another statistic. That's the hidden power of telling these stories. Every retelling might stop another tragedy. Romance scams are notoriously hard to prosecute. The perpetrators hide behind international borders, fake IDs, and encrypted messaging apps. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3, tracks these reports, but agents say they only see the tip of the iceberg. An agent interviewed by CBS explained, "By the time victims come forward, the money's been transferred through 5 countries. We're not chasing one criminal, we're chasing smoke." Still, agencies are adapting. There's now more collaboration between U.S. and foreign cyber units, improved fraud detection technology, and public awareness campaigns urging victims to report without shame. Because silence is the scammer's greatest weapon. One of the detectives who reviewed Laura's case said something that stayed with Kelly forever. "Your mom wasn't foolish. She was targeted by professionals." That distinction matters. It turns victims from punchlines into people whose only crime was wanting to be loved. Since Laura's death, advocacy groups have used her story to push for reforms in how banks and dating platforms respond to red flags. Some banks now issue romance scam alerts when large transfers are made to new or suspicious accounts. Dating apps have introduced better AI systems to detect fake profiles. But even with those changes, the battle is uphill. Scammers evolve, they adapt. They don't need guns or masks, just Wi-Fi and empathy gone wrong. In the months after her mother's funeral, Kelly often drove to the river. She said she could still feel her mother there, not in the water, but in the quiet. She was lonely, Kelly said softly, but she wasn't weak. She was strong enough to love again, and that's what they used against her. Laura's case officially closed as an undetermined death. No criminal has ever been caught or charged, and maybe that's the hardest part. Knowing justice might never come, only lessons. Romance scams thrive because they exploit what makes us human, hope. I hope that love can start with a message. Hope that second chances are real. Hope that loneliness has an end. But love that demands secrecy isn't love. Love that drains your bank account isn't love. And love that exists only behind a screen can sometimes be a mask for something darker. If you or someone you know is speaking to a stranger online who seems too perfect, too urgent, too dependent, pause. Verify. Ask questions. Because it's not just your money on the line, it's your heart. Imagine if Laura had told just one friend what was happening, if one bank employee had asked one more question, if one dating app had flagged one more fake profile. Maybe the story would have ended differently. But through her daughter's courage, her story now saves others. That's how justice sometimes looks, not in a courtroom, but in awareness. Thank you for staying through to the end of this story. If Laura's tragedy moved you, don't let it stop here. Every share spreads awareness. Every comment breaks the silence. Every new subscriber helps BYTE Crimes keep uncovering the hidden dangers of the digital world. So before you go, hit that like button, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe if you believe stories like Laura's deserve to be told, not to sensationalize, but to save. Because on the internet, love can heal, but it can also kill. And that's why we tell these stories.